welcome to this latest edition of Weather or Not. I'm Meteorologist Brian Karstens. Thank you so much for tuning into today's program. We've got a few things to talk about. Of course, Scott is gone today. He took some time off. He went to the Iowa State basketball game last night, and good for him. I'm glad he had an opportunity to do that. And, we'll see him back tomorrow. So today's program, we're going to visit a little bit, first of all, about where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going to go, because we've got some mild weather coming our direction. That's a big talker. Yesterday was 32 in Sioux Falls. Yep, and I will admit it was a little bit chilly for my taste, although honestly, it could be a whole lot worse in mid-November. I don't know if you know this or not, but you look back through the history books of KELOLAND weather, and you get to this calendar date, and it's amazing the kinds of storms that we've had in the past. I know in the 1940s, the Armistice Day blizzard, I forget the exact year that occurred, but that was right in this time period. Obviously, mid-November, you can get some pretty big storms through the plains and the upper Midwest. So I'm kind of thankful that our weather pattern is fairly tranquil. We've got some nice weather coming up here for the rest of the week. So even these 30s and 40s that we saw yesterday, thing of the past. We're going to warm up. We're also going to take care of this, the remnant snow that's on the ground. You can see that across eastern South Dakota. This was the picture this morning, and of course this will be updated here tomorrow morning. So after we get into the 40s and low 50s today, we'll see that reduction in snow cover. But it is interesting if you look across the country right now, look at all of the lake effect snow. We talk about Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, all of the Great Lakes. There's been snow with this pattern, unseasonably cold air. And isn't it something to see the snow cover all the way down into Tennessee and North Carolina? So I know we've had our little taste, but even down into Florida this morning, air temperatures have been in the 30s. So it's a pretty impressive pattern, really, to seeing that depth of cold. But it's kind of a one-and-done deal. This is a shot of polar air that's evacuating, and as that takes place, I think we're going to warm up. In fact, our upfront forecast for today, we're looking at temperatures likely into the 60s this afternoon for much of western into central South Dakota. I think winters there, probably Kennebec out to Murdo, should be pretty mild. Northwest wind, though, goes with it today. And even in Sioux Falls, we'll be dealing with some of those winds this afternoon and some gusts in that 30-mile-an-hour range. But even with that, that's a great recipe for reducing snow cover. And tonight, we're going to see those lows dropping back into the 30s. And then for tomorrow, temperatures are topping back out in the 50s with less wind. So I would say overall, we can handle that in the forecast. That looks pretty good. Well, coming up next, we're going to take a look at the picture for some 70s in South Dakota yet this week. That sounds interesting. We'll visit on that subject coming up next. Stay with us. Welcome back to Weather or Not. I'm meteorologist Brian Karstens. All right, so we're visiting about the weather forecast, returning to what we've been used to most of the fall, which is, of course, above normal weather. Temperatures that have, been really for a long time quite a bit above normal. But wasn't this something, this air mass that came in during the weekend really changed things up? And I think that really helped to demonstrate the fact that, yes, we can get cold. And when the depths of that cold, it goes all the way into Florida. Have you heard about Florida, the falling iguanas out of the trees? It's a true thing. Yep. TV stations down there posting about that. I've seen plenty of chatter. Temperatures in the 30s all the way past Orlando. So look at that across the North American continent, how impressive that is. A lot of lake effect snow. We just talked about that. So the pattern now, though, is we focus to the West Coast. We are now turning our attention to mild Pacific air and air masses that come off the Pacific Ocean. They come up over top of the Rockies. They warm as the air descends and dries. And so we end up with this kind of a flood of above normal temperatures. Just really a math game at this point. Like on Friday, for example, I'm going to pick on Friday. here in just a moment, but I think temperatures are going to be well above normal. We could be looking at least 20 degrees above normal for parts of our viewing area. And even the weekend, when it starts to slide, it's not going to be an all abrupt change. And I would argue, too, that even with the pattern change coming up next week, we're not advertising polar air or anything that's really cold here. It looks like temperatures will still be, on average, at least near normal, which, when you bring up that conversation, what is normal now? Well, as it turns out, normal temperature should be in the mid-40s, low to mid-40s for early next week. It depends on where you live. Rapid City, as Scott mentioned yesterday, he did a nice little breakout on the first day where our average high is about 40. And, of course, in Rapid City, that's not until early December. But if you're in Watertown, that's quite quickly approaching. So, again, that's just kind of where this map tells us the story, if we're above normal or below the averages. Now, there is an interesting little twist to this map as you kind of look out here toward the end of next week. You see all that blue coming into the desert Southwest? I am going to talk about that in our next segment because there is some interesting weather going on there with some possible stormier weather conditions coming in the southern Rockies. We'll see how that all plays out. But if you're just focused on the 7-day forecast, you don't have to worry about that yet at all. Here's a little tidbit of information. I showed this morning. Look at these temperatures on Friday. 70s west of Sioux Falls. We're talking maybe an 80-degree temperature possible in the south central. It's something to watch. And then, of course, we get to see just what the clouds do on Friday. But boy, oh boy, yeah, you think about things you can do outdoors. Anybody wanting to hang their Christmas lights? See, we need to get new lights here. I think we need to get the new energy-efficient ones here on the graphic. But, hey, it tells the story, right? It's mid-November. We got to hang those Christmas lights. Great day to do it if you can. Okay, well, coming up, promise, we'll look at that weather pattern. See if we have any storm systems down the road. Stay with us. You're watching Weather or Not, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Weather or Not. I'm meteorologist Brian Karstens. So, as we continue to talk about weather and the trends ahead, I wanted to take our conversation a little bit into something that's, a little bit different here as we look at the forecast. And I want to bring up some of the model discussions because this is a nice format to discuss a little bit more in depth as to what's coming around the bend, especially when we cross into mid-November, because I think we're all kind of looking out there, seeing if we're seeing any signs that real winter weather could start settling in at some point. So I'm going to take you through a little example here, model run by model run here. This is a look at the European model. In fact, what we're going to do, just to kind of even this up here, we'll start here with day one. And what you're seeing on the map, anything in blue, is snow, green, rain, okay? So that gets us a talking point here. And obviously, too, as we look at the patterns going in toward the end of the week, we have a big ridge here across the middle section of the country. We've just talked about that, how warm it's going to be here ahead of a big Canadian low up there in Saskatchewan. It looks like way to our north, and that's going to draw up all that warm air here into the northern plains. But you know what? We kick out into next week. Take a look at Arizona. Okay, do you see it down here in the desert Southwest? Kind of interesting, kind of watching a disturbance there moving in. Now, this model run here, this only takes us out to early Monday morning. So what we're going to do, I'm going to flip back to the previous run. Now, this runs out a little bit farther, okay? So you see there that rain in Kansas, that takes us out to Monday and Tuesday, okay? Now, I want you to notice, too, do you see the Iowa? A little bit of blue in there, a little snow. Okay. That's the European model. Okay, now what we're going to do now, just because we can do this, we're going to go over to the American model. Okay, we're going to go to the latest forecast, and we're going to bring up the same product here. Okay, we're going to look at rain versus snow, and we're also looking at the storm track. Now, there it again, we're kind of fast-forwarded into Sunday, Monday of next week. Same system. Sitting down there in the four corners. Do you see the snow there in the blue? Coming out into Colorado. Now, that takes us out. Let's see where that sits on the timeline. That's Sunday night early Monday morning. Now, what do you notice here as we get into Monday of next week? Do you see a difference here? If you don't, let me zoom in a little bit more for you. You see the snow here in Nebraska, southern South Dakota. Now, I will tell you that is a little more consistent on the American model. It's trying to kick out this storm system a little bit farther to the north. And, my usual comment on this subject would be the European model would be the superior model, and I still believe that to be true. But I also want to acknowledge the fact that the American model won this last weekend. It was more accurate with the snow prediction. This pattern comes out of the Southwest, so it's a little different setup for us. Just for fun, let's bring up the Canadian model, okay? So here we are, same time period. This is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday of next week. Look at your low coming out of the panhandle of Texas through central Kansas. You got rain, and at this point, probably warm enough for all rain on the Canadian. And quite honestly, even when the American model does try to convert over to some snow, it's marginally cold enough to do that. There's no Arctic air, certainly nothing polar like we just experienced here. So I do want to keep that in mind too. Now, just because we're on the subject here, looking out across the country here, it's always interesting to look even beyond that, because even the Canadian model is throwing in a couple of different waves out of the northwest. You can pick and choose all these you want. Remember, models give us clues. They try to establish some patterns. One piece of advice I would give you if you ever peruse these on the internet, and this weather data is freely accessible. People can look at this all the time. But you do have to be careful about the jerkiness of model runs, run to run, this 6-hour period, and then suddenly 6 hours later, it's going to cast an entirely different picture. And that's what we see when we look at long-range pictures a lot. And that's why we're kind of careful to filter through that, give you a little bit more perspective. But we do have some ways to kind of water that down. Let me show you the ensemble. This is off the European model for next week. So what we're just looking at here is the rhythm of the weather, the troughs and the ridges. So what I'm curious to see is that area right there in the desert Southwest, moving into Arizona by the weekend. Do you see that? That is being picked up on the modeling, the ensemble. So that tells us that it's not just one thing sounding that. This is actually, it has some weight to it in the modeling. It's a statistical significant feature there. And obviously how it gets absorbed into the broader flow as it comes out of the Southwest early next week will make a big difference. If you like AI, there's the European model version of the AI, at least that particular interpretation. I find that interesting too, because it too has a pretty decent low. Let me bring this up. One thing about the Euro AI, we do have a 6-hour snowfall product here. And look at this. See, this is why I love this show. I can pick out stuff like that. Look at that. That agrees with the American model. It's, again, the same camp as this weekend. We've got the AI version of the Euro. We've got the GFS, and we've got the Canadian, except the Canadian not putting out snow. But same issue with the storm track. It's trying to produce a little bit of snow there in Nebraska early next week. Even later in the week, look at that. It's got a little more snow into Wyoming, western Nebraska. Now, if you want to look at temperature trends through that whole period of time, let's rewind. Oh, I want to see this. Look at Friday. Remember our forecast on Friday in Sioux Falls is 62. Look at those temperature anomalies. And if you can't read that, I think I actually have a closer picture of this. Maybe. Let me go to this one right here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, if you can't read that number over Sioux Falls, South Dakota, that is registering 28 degrees above normal. Okay, now remember what Scott Mundt said yesterday. What's normal high now? I think it's around getting closer to 50, upper 40s, we'll say 48. So you do the math on that. So 48, and remember that average, that number I just showed you, that's between the high and the low. So it's not just the high temperature being, almost 30 degrees above normal, but I'm just telling you, there's some upward potential in there, and I'm just curious to see what it says for raw temperature. 65, Sioux Falls. There it is. I think there's some room in there, and I'm not going to give up on the chance that we hit 70 yet in Sioux Falls. I probably said that, a couple weeks ago. But we'll see. We're going to be close. Clouds will make the difference on that. But isn't that all interesting weather that as we go through time, we'll see how that comes together. By the way, another little subject at hand. You notice our 7-day forecast has a little rain in it. Chance there Saturday. There's your system out of North Dakota. Just a little hint of that as it brushes through and brings down that cold front. But at any rate, it looks like that's kind of the setup here as we go into the forecast. And of course, you can look way beyond day 7. Yep, interesting to see that. No threatening major snowstorms. If you're curious about the total amount of snow, which, by the way, this will be our next segment as we wrap things up today. But so far, not too bad. That takes us all the way just about to Thanksgiving, doesn't it? So imagine that. We get all the way out to that point. And, yeah, I know a lot of you will be paying attention to the weather, as we will too. I think we're hosting Thanksgiving this year at the Karstens house. All right, well, coming up, we're going to look at snow chances. We're going to look at the long-range picture. We always try to do that on this program. Stay with us. You're watching Weather or Not, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Weather or Not. My name is Meteorologist Brian Karstens, and I'm glad you're watching this program. We just had a kind of an interesting side note to the weather forecast and how we develop and look at models. I enjoy kind of visiting about that because it gives you maybe a little different flavor of what we look at behind the scenes, because weather data is everywhere. There's so much of it now, and it's a matter of parsing out what is most reliable, also picking out trends and looking at those things. So that's a little bit of the scientific method there at hand that we like to try to use. Let me bring you up to speed on a couple more subjects here as we round out this last segment of the show. We're going to look at, again, a little more of a perspective on the long-term pictures. So I like to show this, and I know Scott will bring this up too. This is what we call our 500 millibar pattern. So if we're looking at the atmosphere, and we look about halfway through the depth of the atmosphere, so total air content, 500 millibars is about halfway. And so this gives us a good idea of some steering winds, kind of co-links to eventually where the jet stream is. So it's pretty obvious when you look at the beginning of the map here that we're in a northwest flow. And it's also important you know that connects to the Pacific Ocean. And it's mild. That's why we're so much above normal. Now we get into Friday. Do you see how the weekend is featuring this little trough feature in North Dakota and southern Canada? That's why it turns from blue to purple right there. Okay, so the important thing we need to know about that is that that's going to scoop up the warmest air ahead of it. So that makes a lot of sense. So we would maximize our temperatures on Friday. Then you notice that low sitting down near Phoenix, Arizona. So that's the feature. Now look how it gets absorbed and it comes up to the northeast next week. Right there it is. So that's the one that's a little bit of a wild card. We'll see if it decides to snow a little bit in Colorado. Probably. I think Colorado would be very much in line for some snow with something like that. It's just a matter of, as it gets pushed to the north, is there enough cold air left over to result maybe in a little bit of snow? We'll see. Now, as we go through time, remember, the farther we go out, the less accurate these things are. But it is interesting to see another trough there. Denver, Albuquerque, there it is, coming into Kansas and Oklahoma, right in there, the 20th of November. And then that gets thrown into the Great Lakes, and then you got, that. Now, that's another interesting little sidebar. It's only one model run. Not going to worry about that, but that is something interesting to see. Little noise there at the end of the long-range forecast. So this is the map we show sometimes when we look at the long-range snow picture. There's a variety of ways we can do this. So this is basically parceled out in 7-day increments, okay? So when we look at week 1, we're looking at from basically the model initialized here on the 10th of November. So we look out to the 17th of November. It does a pretty good job picking up your lake effect snow there, Indiana. You see upstate New York, places like that. It also picks up on some of that little hint of snow out of Colorado Sunday, Monday. Do you see that? And look at this. It does paint that picture into South Dakota a little bit there next week. So, yes, there's some things to watch in there. Now, again, these are 7-day rolling averages. So that's why the colors look a little more broad in their scope and their nature, because you're dealing with a product here that's, again, incorporating 7 days worth of snowfall. So example here's December 1st. So that's your last week of November. And it's interesting when you see the pattern going from the southwest to the northeast. I do think that's one thing of a particular interest when you have snow in Colorado, and then it connects up into Nebraska and the Dakotas into Minnesota. So that's where we're at there. If we cross into that first week of December, kind of the same pattern there. So it does lend itself to some snows. I do also want to point out the fact that it's trying to snow all the way down into Texas. So the modeling must be hinting at some colder air trying to push in there. And so it is, something we're going to watch as we get into December. I don't usually take this out much more than that. You know, if you want to go 3 or 4 weeks out, you can do that, but you got to be a little careful on that. So that's just a little interesting piece of data there, too, that we can relay. One other thing here, if you want to add it all up, you can do that. That's, 46 days worth of snow. How about that? Does that mean we're going to be off to a busy start to winter? Well, Scott, is on record with his snow forecast now, and he's got 31 inches of snow, 31 and a half, I believe is his exact number. And, we'll see where we end up here, right? We could end up with some busier segments of weather. A lot of things that are pointing toward at least some of that rolling in December. He doesn't break up the forecast month by month, that is, but I would say December already is showing some more activity, especially if we get the cold to come down. And, this is an example of that when we looked at this graphic here a little bit ago. I'm not saying that this is exactly what's going to happen, but anytime we start seeing some blocking features up in Canada that can route some of that cold to the south, which, by the way, is exactly what we just went through here. We ended up getting a nice little block that sent some cold air south. Not in the fashion that would form, a huge trough in the west, but there's always things to watch when it comes to weather. And I do think that that's very interesting to piece all that together as we watch the big picture there. Here's the precipitation outlook. It's not just snow. I know many of you are still commenting about, we're heading into fall and it'd be kind of nice to get a little more rain. Just a good old-fashioned soaking rain into the soil profile. I think that helps our trees. And certainly there's some moisture there. If you look at the 7-day tallies, look at this. Down in Texas and Arkansas, there's a lot of moisture the next few days. In fact, this pattern starts at the end of the 7-day or gets into next week. And then look at that. Really takes off, doesn't it, here across the lower Mississippi Valley. Sometimes these systems will scoop up that water. See this? Now, this is the grand total through the end of November. And what I like to do sometimes is look at the actual anomaly. So I'm going to do the 30-day anomaly here. And wow, that takes us out to December 10th. There's a lot of green on that map. So maybe that's where we'll end today's show. It's just a little bit of thinking about that pattern as we go down the road into the month of December. Not necessarily advertising all that for here, but it is giving us something more interesting to watch with reflection of those storm systems we just talked about. So if you like it being quiet and mild, this is your week. You've got some good days coming up in the forecast. Well, that's my time for today. As of course, Scott Mundt will be back tomorrow, and we'll have, I'm sure, a nice chat about the weather forecast. Until then, you have yourself a great day, and we'll see you back next time.